So this is part 2. Part 1 was so good, there was a part 2, part 2A, right? Right? Just like the movies, part 2A. Drink. Okay, let's get into the real fun, exciting stuff like cost allocation. Just charges you. We used to have a guy years ago, he wrote the cost allocation tag. He's like, this is where the rubber meets the road, is cost allocation. So we always said, cost allocation is our life. So that's what we do. We're always allocating costs, right? So we're going to talk about indirect costs and admin costs. Talk about cost allocation plans. We're going to talk about indirect cost rates, the NICRA rate. We're going to talk about the MINUS rate, the new thing that came about with the uniform guidance. How many of you have an indirect cost rate? Oh, nobody. Just raise a hand. Even just lie. Raise a hand. Show me one hand. Cost allocation plan. You're all cost allocation plans. De minimis. Anybody use de minimis? No. So you're all under a cost allocation plan. Yes. Yes. Okay. It's okay. You can be. You don't have to be. What about you? None of you have direct grants, or you don't have any more current direct grants, right? So you're strictly, most of you are all WIOA only funded? Okay, so those are caps, yeah, generally capped. State. Yeah, you have them, but nobody at the local level. But do you use your cost allocation plan? You don't use a indirect cost rate, right? Okay. Indirect, yeah, okay. Yeah. Identify yourself. Yeah.
That's not the person I talked to, but you have an indirect cost rate.
We do the de minimis.
Oh yeah. Okay, good. Oh yeah, good. So let's talk about these real quick. So indirect costs, admin costs, defined at 20.1. Indirect admin costs are incurred common. They can't be allocated. That's why you have these allocation plans. These are generally indirect. We don't know how to tie them out to other programs. Direct costs, you can say, oh, this is person served in this program. It's directly related. Let's do that. So it's real straightforward. But everything else goes into like either an indirect pool or you capture it, and then you have some basis to allocate it, right? You can have as many cost pools as you like. You know, usually you will have one because you're one small entity. But like when you go to a state of Ohio, they had 1,800 cost pools. We were part of ETA programs are absorbed into the TANF agency. So TANF is $16 billion in Ohio. ETA is like 100 million. So we were like a drop. I mean, it took them a year before we even got them to file reports because they didn't even know we existed. We just got merged into them and like nobody knew, you know, like this is, you're running this program now because they reorganized the state. But they have this mega cost pool because they handle all the HHS programs, you know, justice and child and this and all that. So everybody's got a cost pool and it gets down and gets down and gets, you know, and this goes here. I mean, they would have a binder twice the size of that each quarter. And they could barely get the reports in time because they'd have to run this big cost allocation system before then they could dump that into the financial reporting system, right? But it worked for them. You know, they had an automated system. They used remote random moment sampling, things like that, because it's just, they're so big, right? So, you know, usually for you guys, you have one cost pool, probably an admin cost pool or an indirect cost pool. Costs get associated there, charge there, and then you just figure out a way to charge it out. They got a benefit, equitable benefit share, things like that. There's got to be a reason. Everybody pays their share. I know this was a big thing to do, and we'll talk about IFAs and things like that, that sort of talk about benefit received, cost objective, stuff like that. So it's equitable results for benefits received or derived. 683 talks about what is admin. Those are admin that are subject to costs. That's the list of allowable admin activities. Indirect costs are admin costs in probably 99.99999%. It's not 100% because there are some indirect costs that are programmatic, that are maybe put in the pool. Education institutions usually have program costs in their indirect pool because they have student unions and sports facilities and other things that are not program direct. They just put that in the pool because they share them out to everybody, right? But for our business, it's mainly indirect is your admin cost, because that's why you're putting them in there to begin with, because there's no way to direct charge them. So they become indirect, which are the admin costs, right? You have to be consistent across all your programs. So when you classify a cost a certain way, it's that way across all your programs, right? So if you had other programs besides WIOA, an admin cost is treated the same way no matter what all those other programs are. It's just a matter of how you're going to split it across those other programs. What's the best method for grantees to utilize? How do you know which one to pick? You got a cost allocation plan, you got a de minimis, or an indirect cost rate. How do you know? Now, there's a movement, and I'm not sure it's going to happen in ETA, but I have a feeling it's going to come soon. Under the new administration, OMB went to NIH, which is one of the biggest grant makers, and they're putting everybody on de minimis. Everybody's going de minimis. They're like, you know what, we're not giving the universities, educational institutions have very high cost rates, or indirect cost rates, I should say. And they're saying, that's out. We're not paying for all this infrastructure. You're going to 15% across the board. So that's the biggest grant making organization. It's just a matter of time. They're going to because it simplifies things, it's going to be like, you know what? Everybody's going to start going to de minimis. We'll adjust to maybe the percentage, but everybody's just going to get 15%, and that's how. That may come to us, so I'd be prepared for that. Be prepared for that, because people in the Office of Cost Determination, they'll start doing away with that and saying, who's going to approve these plans? Like ETA approves them. You won't have those people around approving plans anymore. So now it's going to be either an indirect rate, and they're going to say, well, why do we need an indirect rate? 15%. So be prepared for that. Say again? Approve what? They do, but I think that's going to disappear. Yeah, what's his name does it? Yeah, DOL, Office of Cost Determination in Labor. Each agency has an Office of Cost Determination. If you're cognizant as labor, we have an office, they approve indirect and they approve cap. But they only approve cost allocation plans generally to states. Okay, then states usually approve your cost allocation plans for your local areas, right? But that's going to disappear. That's going to disappear. They're either going to say indirect rate, and they'll probably do away with that because that's the same entity that approves those. They're going to put everybody on probably de minimis. So if I were you, I'd start looking at my books and saying, if I applied the de minimis to my office, what does that mean for me? What does that mean for me for reimbursement of my indirect costs? And start looking at those things like, hey, you're on de minimis, I'm on a cap, this is how we recover, this is what we recover on a de minimis, what's the deal here, what are we going to do? Start thinking about that. You must have an approved methodology to charge indirect costs. If you don't, you cannot charge them. If you don't, we'll put you on de minimis until you get one, but we won't let you charge those costs. You cannot, we'll back them out. We'll just say, you got to have one in. If not, then use the de minimis. So we got 3 methods. Pass-through entity, when you're passing money down, you're the local area, you're responsible for your sub-recipients that they have one of those 3. So when you're awarding funds, they got to either have a de minimis, a cost allocation plan, or an indirect cost rate, right? Otherwise, they can't get indirect costs. Who is your cognizant agency? Well, who gives you the most money? Most of you guys are going to be labor. Other areas have maybe HHS or someone else because they're bigger. But we're moving away from caps. That's going to disappear, I think, soon. It's going to be a lot easier, I think, right? It's a lot easier. You have these giant spreadsheets, right? Every cost got across the board and allocated out and total it and cross-added and so forth. You guys don't remember the days, probably you're all too young, where you had the big paper worksheets and you did things, and by hand. As an accountant, I was an auditor. We used to joke. We'd come in the morning and say, you know what? I was out this weekend and I found one that has 30 columns, right? You'd have 6 columns and then somebody, I got 30 columns, And you'd put all this stuff in there and you'd add it across and you'd be off like 10 cents and you'd have to start over, right? Start over adding and adjusting, and I'm still right. Then we got a computer printer that would print. It was called Sideways, was the program. So you could put a spreadsheet, but it would print across first like this. So you could make it unlimited columns. So we joke, I got this one that's 82 columns across. We put up on the board and print across, and no kidding. No kidding. Those are the days. Oh, those are the days. Thank God we were paid by the hour. That's all I can say. All I can say. Thank God we were paid by the hour. So this is, think about this. What works best for you? You may start thinking about, if we got to go to de minimis, what's that mean? And so forth. Again, formula grants, direct grants, what to consider. State level allocation plans, methods, and local plans. The state's responsible for validating all their workforce areas have approved acceptable allocation methodology, a cost allocation plan. If you have multiple direct recipient awards, generally the government's going to say you need to have an indirect cost rate, okay? Or you're going to have a plan. You have to tell them. When you get your award, they'll say, what do you have here? You got 3 boxes you check, and you'd submit that. Got a documentation for everything. But the thing about de minimis is you don't need to document. That's a change now. We say you get 15% up to a certain dollar amount. We don't need to see documentation beyond it. It's meant to be a simple plan for small organizations to make it easy. We don't want to say, well, you get this, we're going to knock down the rate, and then we're going to still make you keep all that documentation. We say, no. It's 15%. We're not going to say, was it really 10 or 5 you spent? You get 15%, and that's it. It's not worth going any farther. And then, you have how long do these things last? De minimis is continuous. Indirect cost rates every 4 years, you got to revise them, update them. Takes them a while to get them to you. Sometimes you don't even get the rate till after the grant ended. You got to go back, revise, go back and adjust because they have so many of them. You got thousands of these things they're approving, right? Application process, all that takes time. Caps, they're still, updated annually. They're modified very easily because you can just add another cost pool. But you're always reconciling and they're time consuming, right? You're always reconciling to what you spent and does it agree with their system? We had a state that had an allocation methodology, but it did not agree with their system over time, and they never reconciled, and it grew to about $7, $8, $9 million. We went and did a review, and somehow the state said, wait a minute, well, you're reporting this to us, and your books are showing this, and we went back years, and it was like $9 million. They fired everybody in the office. They fired the director, the state manager, everybody. I won't tell you what state, this is years ago. It was in Region 5, though. It was one of our states. But it was like that because it's a big you're dealing at a state level, you're reconciling a lot of cost pools to report to us and whatnot. So that's a big time consuming process. Like in Ohio, they got this big system. They have to run it to report. And, then you try to trace something down. You got a report that has money on it. You say, I want to look at this. And they pull out a report with like 500 pages of like 12 cents for healthcare benefits, it's all this stuff that gets split so many ways that it just, it's pennies and dollars and whatnot. And you're like, well, where is this from? It's like, well, it's a staff cut of somebody's pay. You can't even trace it. So it's so complicated. Again, NICRAs, the indirect cost rates are good for 4 years. You got to reapply. You could have multiple rates. Usually educational institutions have 3 or 4 rates. They have a research rate, a general rate, things like that they can use and so forth. De minimis rate, no duration, no renewal, easily calculated, limited documentation, updated by the uniform guidance. They change the thresholds, applied for reporting purposes, cannot include unallowable costs in your calculation. That's a sort of straightforward, right? So when you look at these, hey, this looks like a good deal. They've raised the percent and they've raised what it applies to, so that's sort of good. Yeah, well, they're good for 4 years, yeah. No, you can use it for 4 straight years and then you have to reapply and do adjustments. The rate could go up or down after 4 years. You do a reconciliation. So that changed. So you get a rate approved, 18%. That's good for those 4 years. And then at 4 years, you go in with, we have different cost data, things are different. It might be 19%, may drop. You go every year? For indirect? Oh, yeah.
Certain types of rates, yes,
Yeah.
but not for the normal.
Use the microphone.
I guess the state is the only one that has the negotiated rate here. So your rates are annual. All state rates are annual. Okay, but if you had others in the audience who got a direct grant, it would still be annual based on their fiscal year. And it just changes depending on what your each entity's fiscal year is. And so I'll talk to Tom about the 4-year later just to see what that is related to.
So again, requirements pass through your requirement to validate that they have a proper method for charging indirect costs. They're accepted by all federal agencies. So it's no more, well, it's good for labor, but HUD's telling us they won't accept this rate. That's in the uniform guidance. If you have an approved methodology, every federal entity must accept it, okay? And I would, like when I was grant officer, when you said I wanted to go to de minimis, I would actually issue a modification so that you have a document to say DOL has approved us using a de minimis. So you would have that, just like you have an approved indirect cost rate, you have that document, right? It's got to be part of your initial risk assessment when you're looking at that. The indirect cost rates have carry forward provisions regarding changing costs, like as your cost structure may change and go up and down, you may have to carry forward and adjust your rate. If you're not as much, you got to, it's lowered to make up for it. So there's always a reconciliation process every year going along to do this. Right. Direct grantees report indirect costs on their 9130s. States do not. Formula grants do not. It's only if you have a direct grant, like a youth build, things like that, you would report that there's a line item. You'd say how much indirect, you put the amount, the rate, and the calculation. You got to be sure that math is done correctly. And you have a 10-line item budget for those direct grantees. You cannot exceed that indirect cost amount that's approved in your grant agreement. You can modify. You have to come into us and say, well, so we got our new rate. It's a new adjustment. We want to make the adjustment. You can do that, but you got to get grant officer approval. You can spend less, but you can't spend more. So you cannot charge unless you have approved methodology, right? De minimis rate. And we got a mistake here on this one, I think. Let me just see something. Hold on. Yeah, it's this one. Okay. Modified. So de minimis rate, you get 15% on your modified total direct costs, right? And up to you get 15% up to the first $50,000 of your sub-awards. Sub-awards. Those are sub-recipient awards, not contracts, not subcontracts, sub-recipient awards, right? It's 15% of total fringe benefits, travel, utilities, insurance, supplies, contractual, consultant services, supportive services, forget participant costs, that's a mistake, and other category. Get 15% of that, right? Yeah, starting October 1st of 24, it kicked up, right?
But it doesn't apply to awards that are already on the street. It's a new award after October. You can't just change the 10 to 15 for the old award.
You're stealing my thunder.
Oh, okay. I just wanted to.
Stealing my thunder. There goes another bad joke I was going to tell you. So it's only new awards because that's when it affects. So if you have a current award that's crossing this past October, you cannot modify it. I mean, to me, I thought you should be able to, but the ETA says we're not changing them. You're on that old award, new awards, you'll get the new percentage, right? Because it used to be 15% of a lesser amount, I think. And I think was it 10%? Well, I'm getting old, man. It was only a couple of years ago. 10%, it's gone up to 15, and they've raised this amount too. But remember, it's sub-awards. Now, we talk about supportive service and participant costs, things like that. Why don't we allow that, right? I was thinking about this. It's funny, the things you think about when you're sleeping, You're getting 15%, we will not pay you 15% because you write a check for $1 or you write it for $50,000. It only takes you the same amount of time, but why would we pay 15% on the amount of that check as opposed to dollar amount? You're still getting it because you're getting 15% of the time it takes to do that work. No matter what it is, you're charging payroll and staff time, so you're getting reimbursed for that. Don't think you're not like, oh, we don't get on this, yeah, because you don't get it on the dollar amount, you get it on the work you're doing. So keep that in mind. So that's disallowed. So what's excluded? You can't charge it on equipment. You don't get 15% of equipment, capital expenditures, patient care, rental costs, tuition, scholarships, participant support costs, right? And any excess over 50,000, you cannot charge the 15. So it's those other categories, this slide, minus this, I gotta correct that. And you get your 15%. So all the work you're doing, you know, you're getting that 15%. You're just not getting it out of a set dollar amount because equipment's a one-time. Why would we pay 15% on the cost of a piece of equipment? That doesn't make sense. Or capital expenditure, so forth, right? Again, you know, this was all created to make it simple for smaller grantees, but I think it's going to come across the system pretty soon. I mean, when they did it to NIH and all the research grants, that's a big amount of money. I mean, I think they're like $50–60 billion, NIH and all those, and Science Foundation, all that. So they're all going to 15% immediately too. I mean, they just right away modified the grant saying now you have 15% period. So they're all scrambling. Infrastructure costs, right? Everybody's favorite, right? That was a great clause we put in the WIOA regulation, right, when it came out. Nobody knew where it came from, just all of a sudden, whoa, what's this? You know, with no money for it. So let's talk about that. But that was part of, you know, building a system, making everybody pay for this infrastructure that participates in it. We're very flexible with this. You know, we're not trying to grind it down. This is in the regs here if you want to read more about it. There's a citation. But what did we learn? Usually lack of policy and guidance from the states. When it came out, you know, we were late getting policy out. This was a big battle with other federal agencies of, you know, they didn't want to pay voc rehab, education. The non-DOL agencies were like, why do we got to pay for this? And we're like, well, it's how much you pay, benefits received and so forth, things like that. But eventually over time, I think it's worked out, so forth. Or we had over prescriptive policies from the state saying it'll be this way. It's not meant to be that. It's a local determined methodology that you agree among your core partners how you're going to support infrastructure. You don't put everything in the building under it, just what is shared among it, what is the common things that they share in, right? We have issues with not all core partners are paying their share. You know, that was an issue with the budget, incorrect budgets, they're not sharing them. You know, everybody battled over the building when we had one stop. When you had all come into one, everybody, my building, your building, we sort of got around that over time. I think that's resolved itself. But now we have this infrastructure. Who's paying for parts of the building? So you pay for your direct part. The things you all share in, certain things, you allocate, right? And that's got to be part of your MOU. We've had direct grants that weren't included or Job Corps. They're now in there. They're mandated. We went to them saying, no, you're part of this. You're DOL. You're our grant. You're part of this. You can't say you're not. You have allocation methods for on-site as well as off-site affiliated locations. You have to have an agreement for those, IFA. What we've seen is no IFAs or no shared services or career services, things like that. You have to spell all that out. That should be in your giant big umbrella MOU, right? You have your state bulletins here, 12, 16. 16 talks about who's got to be a part of it, so that's in there. Most places use either FTEs or square footage to allocate those costs. They'll say this is the pool of what we think is infrastructure, the little common space, entry, those kind of things, insurances. Let's either use FTEs that are in the building or let's use occupied space by the direct programs and just make it simple. Make it simple. We're all about making it simple, aren't we? Again, some terms. We have the one-stop operating system budget. So that's the whole, your workforce area. Do you all have an overall budget of all your programs, all your funding streams, what the budgets are? Yes? No? Yep. Right on. Got to have an infrastructure agreement within them. What are the career service costs? What's the local? There's a local funding mechanism, which means you guys decide it locally. If you don't agree, it becomes a state funding mechanism. Nobody knows how to do that. So complicated. We're hoping nobody's done it. I don't think we haven't heard anything because it's very complicated. If you read the regs, I mean, it's percentages and they have these, you know, quadratic equations in the regs to try to figure it out. This is interesting. We always said benefits received. Well, they pushed us, the non-DOL agents always put us relative benefits received. And I was like, well, benefits received, I mean, we're talking the same thing. So let's not blend these terms so much. And then there were caps in the regs and limitations and so forth for other federal agencies. They can only charge so much, you know, because they lobbied saying we're not going to pay more than 1% or 0.5% or whatever. But these are all sort of new terms when we came around with IFAs. It's all part of the MOU. What's the MOU? Services, who, what, when, where, and how, right? Who are we providing, what we're going to do, how are we going to refer participants, how are we going to provide access, electronic access, access to people with barriers, things like that, handicaps, disabilities, things like that. How long does it last? What's the modification process to the MOU? What's an appeal process if a partner doesn't, agree with what they're paying in the MOU or how they're doing it? There's an appeal process. Are there other contributors, other entities providing money? We have a state in Ohio, it's always battling over the building, who's paying for what. This county, and I think it's in Montgomery County, which is Dayton, the county says, we're building a big building. They took one of these, I don't know if it was a factory or what it was a big mall, but it's a giant one-stop building. Giant, it's huge. And they said, we're gonna pay for the whole building. You guys just go in there and pay for the share of your space that you use, and we'll cover all those other costs. And they just took that argument off from everybody complaining about, I don't wanna pay for that, I don't use it. They have education in there. They have colleges, small colleges. They got training institutions. They got supportive service entities. They have TANF in there. They have workforce in there. They have unemployment. You go in, it's this huge mall. It's a huge mall, and sections, this section's over here, but you can get anywhere, and they're all in one location. And there's no more fighting over, like, why do we got to pay for this? Why do we got to pay for that? The county says, we'll pay for all those common costs. You just pay for your program costs and your space, and that's it. And it's great. I think it's the best one stop in the country because it's everybody's in there, and it's not our programs. Most of them are non-federal programs. It's all the clothing entities for interviews. It's banking in there. They have financial literacy classes. They got everything, and it's just a big hub for that city. It's really nice. If you get a chance, that'd be the place to visit to see how they do it. It's in Dayton, Ohio. Dayton. It's called the Montgomery. It's just an incredible facility. Back to the MOU, it's got to have an operating budget, and then you have to have the infrastructure agreement as part of that, right? Again, we talk about what are the locations of the centers. You got to identify your partners, each what they're going to contribute. What are the operating costs? What are the infrastructure costs? You have a meeting where what are they, and then how are you going to split those? You have a budget, you go through that, and you just walk through this. Allocate costs based on benefits received. What method are you going to use? You're going to use FTEs, you're going to use square footage, you're going to use activity-based, participants served. That sometimes you can use an activity-based allocation method of how many people we enroll. The only problem with that is you can't control how many people get enrolled. So you don't have no control over the end game, where FTEs are pretty fixed, square footage is pretty fixed. You can do little adjustments, but you can do it at certain times. It doesn't adjust your cost allocation that much. And you do this. You update it, you reconcile it, you share the information. We get questions like, well, we don't know who's paying the bills. We don't get who's paying first and whatnot. It's supposed to be transparent to everybody. We want to see accountability. We want to see transparency. Everybody sees what they're paying, why they're paying it, how it's calculated. Because you're all part of that process. And you update it when you can. Each year you update it. Partners come and go, entities come and go, things like that. You have a modification process to deal with that. Again, when to renew it, each MOU must contain, it's renewed every 3 years. Right? You have the new MOU, changes can be made. You have to change it anytime there's a signatory official of the board. So everybody's got to go around, re-sign it all again. That's the biggest thing is getting signatures. Going around, we got to re-sign it again, things like that. One-stop partners change, if they move in and out, that's got to be done. Chief elected officials got to be made aware of it to accept those terms. The infrastructure funding changes, or if any other changes, you got to go through a process to modify and update the MOU, right? How has that worked for you guys in your areas since it's come out? You all have IFAs that's worked its way through?
For Maui, our current one that is going to expire on Monday. Mm-hmm. That was pretty seamless, and that was my first time developing one as an executive director. Mm-hmm. This current one, this new one, a little bit of challenges because of funding.
Amount of money you're going to receive in the new year.
Well, just the uncertainty of that with Job Corps.
Oh, yeah, okay. Oh, yeah, right. Yeah.
And then we had another partner, Maui Economic Opportunity, that lost one of their funding for their senior program. So changes to that, but I think the main thing is communication with all our partners that it's not going to change their amount, what they're paying into it. You know, the county of Maui will absorb everything. And
right.
if some miracle there becomes funding later down the road, then we'll modify it as we need to. But
And, oh, go ahead.
yeah, so.
And everybody's comfortable with the methodology, how it's being done. It's just a matter of like funding levels are
Yeah,
changing, they're
and
impacting
I did
it.
tell them that there was no changes to what they're putting into based on
yeah,
the last
okay.
MOU. One of my current challenges is unemployment right now.
Oh, yeah. They've been a challenge. Mm-hmm. Unemployment's always been a challenge because they're like, we're all electronic now. Why
And
do we,
I'm
you know?
like, okay, this is being recorded. Oh boy.
Oh, yeah.
Just reminding them that they pay only 2.6% into the overall cost of this, so that's very minimal.
Sure.
Like $800 you get charged every quarter, so be a team player.
Yeah, yeah. No, I know, yeah. They were a challenge, you know, nobody seemed to want to play in the beginning. It's like, why do we got to pay for this? But I think over time it's slowly working itself out. But you bring up a good point with Job Corps, with the whole situation in Job Corps now. If they start permanently closing these centers, that's, you know, taking one of the partners completely out. And certainly there's other issues with that, but certainly in the one stop. Is who? Who? A participant? I don't think a participant would. Well, I don't know. You'd have to ask Job Corps. I think, yeah, I mean, they could be. That's right, they could be. I don't know. Question in the back. Sure. Let's get the microphone back there.
Testing 1, 2.
There you go.
Okay. I know we asked our federal officer a while back this question. I'm going to ask the same question again. Is there any
Excuse me.
stipulations that we can hold for the mandated partners of the American Job Center and One Stop System to pay into it? We do let them know that it's a requirement, and we're forever grateful that our county foots the bill for whoever doesn't pay. But is there any best practices or regulations or something that you guys would have that
Make
we
everybody
could
pay.
tell the partners that you are required, like this is part of what you need to do?
Yeah, yeah. No, they are, all core partners are required to pay. No ifs, ands, or buts. I mean, everybody didn't want to pay, like I said, UI, and we had issues with that. Education, voc rehab, small partners, they're all required to pay. Even our program, like Youth Build, so why do we got to pay? Well, it's in your grant now. So we start putting those in the grant agreements, like you must contribute. So every grant we send out, you must contribute to infrastructure. But that's where I think the state, they need to come out and enforce that and say, you got to pay. You know, if it's a methodology, let's have this discussion about how much and how it's going to be calculated, but everybody else is paying. We're not letting you off the hook. You know, and same for non-comprehensive centers. Affiliated sites, they have to have a methodology for that too. So, well, if they don't, I mean, technically they could question your cost because you're paying more than you should be paying and somebody else isn't. You know, but then you should be paying. But are those costs you're absorbing? I mean, are those like, you create an infrastructure pool. You say, okay, this is what's going in that infrastructure pool. So you come up with methodology, and then a couple partners, you know, my share is $50, and I just say, tough. Is that what they do? They say, I'm not going to pay it?
So they pay $13,000 a year. So that you just try.
Oh, that's, and these are our federal DOL programs. No, but I mean like a state our grant, like a what, UI, Job Corps, or, you know, oh, that's the state should get involved and say, no, you got to pay. They got to pay.
providing services? Are they providing services at a WDC?
What does the state do? I mean, there's no, it's like saying there's no consequence if we misspend money. You should disallow, you could disallow them. I mean, there's,
Consequence for them to not pay. Well, okay, so let's.
I wouldn't say that.
This time. BOL comes to monitor.
Right.
programs.
right.
So, have that ever been a finding to the state?
Yes. We've written up states for not doing.
For Hawaii.
Oh, I don't know, well, I haven't known Hawaii that long, but, and they probably don't come off on, but there is consequences. We've said, let's go out and start questioning costs at the state, saying if you ain't paying or this grantee or whatever, it doesn't matter what grantee it is, we're gonna question those costs and say, okay, then state, you can pay us the money. And then it happens. I mean, you can't just disregard it, because you do,
I'm looking at it.
I'm talking to programs, they can't just say, well, what are you gonna do about it?
Like, it's easy for, we cite the local, okay, so we get that, but as the USDOL awards these funding to the agencies that
Yeah.
receive, so if it's part of their,
It's in every grant agreement now. It's in every grant award now. You know, initially when it came out, we didn't add it, I mean, it was all in the formula program, but we didn't include like youth build and job. That lasted about a year or two. That's now in every grant in the terms and conditions. One is you must pay for infrastructure, period. But we don't issue voc rehab grants. They're required to pay. Yeah, they're required to pay. In the regulations, it's in our,
funding source is what I'm, yeah, it's in our regulations.
it's in their regulations too. The front part of, if you go in the front part of WIOA, you know, you look, there's the WIOA regulations that are ETA, those are in the back. I mean, I'm looking at my book, I got one of those books. That's ETA. In the front, you got RSA, voc rehab, all those, they're all in the front, and that's where it talks about infrastructure. It doesn't talk about in ETA regulation, it talks about in the front, we're like, that's the one stop, that's the MOU. They're all required to pay. And we fought with them and they said, okay, we'll do it. We just didn't want to pay a lot. So we, work on the methodology of how you're going to do it. It may not be a lot because they're not physically located there. And
This allows their costs, so how do you make them pay? As long as they're absorbing the cost, you don't have an issue. But when you're charging the cost to the federal source, it's not allowed.
It's an unallowable cost. So it becomes a question cost, and I don't know why this is.
so ETA is paying more than they should be,
Right.
and the non-ETAs are not. I would raise that up to the region, raise it up to the
It
region.
should be a
and
question
national.
cost on ETA side.
Yeah, because we're overpaying.
It goes back to my point that when region monitors,
It's up to them to,
it's very uncomfortable for the local.
sure, oh yeah, absolutely.
$2,000.
Right, right.
Okay, but somebody still has to pay for it.
Right, now I understand. You're
All the
absorbing-
money you guys have, you have enough money to pay that? But rehab has never wanted to participate across the country.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean they don't have an obligation. But you have to process it. But if someone is constantly absorbing it with another funding source, then you're not going to have the feds coming in complaining about that. As long as it's an allowable
One thing
funding.
is one thing we said is when they created this law, they dumped all that
Just don't
on
take it
DOL.
all out of
They dumped it all
WIOA.
on DOL to enforce other federal agencies. And like you say, we don't have the power to go to, except at the secretary level to say, go over there, Mr. Secretary, and fix it because we're eating it. That's the unfortunate thing. We're enforcing all these rules for half these agencies that don't apply. We can only really get our agencies like UI and Job Corps, but we can't get them. But I
Can
mean,
we
it's not right.
shame them?
I would raise it, keep raising that issue.
Keep raising
At the state level, because the state directors can do it. They can force their locals, the state level agencies to pay.
Tom, does shame work? In other words, come up with a report and present it to the state board?
Right, that's right, that's right. Because they all sit on the board, right?
Yes?
Yeah. So put it to them, like, why aren't you paying? You're required to
Well,
pay what
at
you.
least present the data.
Yeah, right, that's right.
Present the information, and hopefully they'll shame them into submission.
Right, that's right, that's right. No, it's a tough challenge, and usually it's not a lot of money either. You're talking, it's a small part, but for them not to pay is just, it's not right, because they know you're paying. Again, we talked about this renewal, you know, it's in our regs 678 of, you know, and we've issued various training guidance on it and so forth of how they said, you know, and they even point to say they're willing to pay. They got their guidance saying, oh yeah, we'll pay, yeah. And renewal, it's got to be signed by everybody, amendments, things like that. We go through these. Non-substantive changes, we don't need to modify. It's only the major changes. Small revisions, we don't have to do that. We got to modify the big changes like CEO changes, stuff like that. Again, real quick, identifying costs, we got all operating costs, and then you got infrastructure, and then all the other additional costs. It can include career services and other shared operating costs. That's all part of that, and that's addressed in one of the tables.
Tom, question.
Sure.
The prior slide, please. So in terms of timing, could you address that, like from a best practice standpoint? When do they start looking at this so that then technically
Sure,
when the contract starts?
Good example, Mao, your agreement expires next week. When have you started working on the new one? Tomorrow? Just teasing, you know, a couple months ago. So, you know, you always want to start early, plan early, because you don't want to wait and so forth.
Kind of watching the whole job corps thing.
I mean, now we're at a unique time because you got this issue with Job Corps and so forth, and who knows with other grants and whatnot, what's going on. Prior to that, usually things didn't change too much. It's really just updating when you had a person change or a template or, you know, some new costs, and it was really, didn't modify too much. Now you're talking, these could be big changes. So, you know, I'd say go with what you have now until it changes. You can always modify anytime during the year. You know, so if it's in 3 weeks from now, something big happens, yeah, you do a modification and so forth. So that's all. But start thinking about that. Just similar like, you know, with the de minimis rates, start thinking about that.
Just to pick up on IFMU, just to throw numbers out there, so the county budget $180,000 a year for WDC. We absorb $102,000 of that. So we have our diehards, they always pay every year of that $180,000.
And that's just for infrastructure.
IFMU covers everything from rent, rent.
You put the whole rent in the whole building?
Rent, all the shared space,
So-
electrical, everything that's.
Where are you getting this money?
So that's not
For the
infrastructure.
county general fund, so all the different departments, we figure out how much we need per year. And
Yeah.
for Hawaii County Research and Development, that $180,000 was for this program, and then we eat the cost, so that's why we're asking.
And that's the cost of the entire building. So I would say, so my thing is, and I'm not sure, we can talk later, but infrastructure cost is not your entire building,
No, that's
right?
just the.
Just that little sliver of common space that everybody sort of uses, some technology and whatnot. Okay, it just seems like it's a lot, but yeah. Insurances, stuff like that, okay. Because I know some states said, let's just put it all in there and just do one big allocation. Well, that's not what it was intent to be. Okay, good, okay. Oh, wow, that's amazing.
Our goal is to downsize. So
Yeah,
we
well, see,
think it's a little slot right now, but
yeah.
downsize and all
So you must have some big entities that are not paying a big amount. And they won't pay their share of what they use. Oh, that's ridiculous. No, like specific, program specific, that's not in there. Yeah, but that's not part of infra. You know, everybody pays their space for program. This is just like the shared space, like the common room, you know, things that are very common, technology that everybody would share, and not like my office space. I'm charged right to adult or whatever. It's not that, okay. Yeah, oh, that's not, that's weird. Let's talk, I want to talk about, yeah. You should. You should count it as stand-in, yeah, if you ever, yeah, absolutely. Because you're spending money that's, yeah, you're not getting reimbursed for it. Stand-in, yeah. We're running out of, how many more slides do I got? We're almost out of time, Macy. Again, infrastructure, this is straightforward. It's in the regs, you know, accounts, these kind of things, lease, Utilities, blah, 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 cannot account any personnel costs unless they're in like a security agreement, you know, you have guards and whatnot, you count that, but we don't count that as like personnel. Key requirements, we'll talk about this because I know we're running, I don't want to press you for lunch right now. When's the effect? Identifying, those are key things of the IFA you have to have, which you talked about. Here's the one, how we can get them to pay, right? Maybe I should come and visit them. And say the guys from Chicago are coming to see you. Why don't we stop right here?